Welcome to Identity Matters, Digital Identity and the Evolution of the Internet, a special InnovationAus.com video podcast series brought to you by Ping Identity. From debating access to anonymity issues in online culture wars to fighting cyber threats on the commercial internet or in the delivery of government services, identity impacts everyone. In this series, we will speak to a compelling list of experts to trace the global online trends that have helped frame digital identity and to understand the cyber landscape shifts that have shaped identity access management practices and zero-trust environments. Join us as we explore the philosophical and practical sides of identity, the fundamental issue at the heart of the Internet.
Welcome to Identity Matters, Digital Identity and the Evolution of the Internet, a podcast series produced by InnovationAus.com in partnership with Ping Identity. My name is Corrie McLeod and I'm the publisher of InnovationAus.com. Today I'm talking with Ashley Diffey, VP of Sales APAC Japan for Ping Identity, and Jason Urranndulla-Davis, who's the founder of Holdaccess, about the human inclusion of digital identity and design. Digital identity can pave the way to equitable, inclusive access to government support and services that all Australian needs. But this conversation is probably to be a fascinating exploration of what we're really talking about to make sure that everyone is included as we move towards more digital identity. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Corrie.
Jason, can I start with you? You founded Holdaccess, otherwise known as WUNA. Tell me a little bit about why you founded it. What was the challenge you saw that really needed attention?
Yeah, so first of all, I come from the land here of the Larrakia Nations, and I pay respect to the elders, past and present, within Australia, the First Nations people. I'm from the Kalkaroon and Wanya Nation, and as an Indigenous man, I grew up experiencing this problem. And today I have family and communities that I interact with, engage with, who are constantly challenged by this same problem. And it's a repetitive cycle of dependency created out of the complexity of not actually solving this problem. So this, I've actually committed 30 years plus working in Indigenous policy, consultation, and as a criminologist, and with a master's in public health, I set out to actually understand what was going on around self-determination for First Nations people and underdocumented people throughout Australia and globally.
I'm going to come back to you because that needs a lot of unpacking. But Ash, identity, how are organisations set up to think about identity in multiple different? We're not even talking. We're talking multitudes of different ways people identify with their own personal life, the way they like to engage with technology. What is it that you're seeing in this space? And then we'll come back, Jason, to you, because I'd love to get to how we kind of bridge the gaps together a little bit.
Yeah, it's a big question, Corrie. We've had a few discussions in this series about decentralised identity and what Australia's done in the past around digital identity, and we haven't yet really landed on a single agreed digital identity for all. And we're seeing it all starting to converge now that we're having multiple platforms with Connect ID, we're having Gov IDs all starting to work together more effectively, which then takes it a step further away from the technology and the standards integration into how do we provide access for all, which is where I think it's a particularly interesting discussion.
So, Jason, some of the we've talked about identity in various, guises and, expressions over a long period of time. And, particularly when we talk about the way that any individual engages with government. You sort of gave an overview before. Where are the areas, maybe culturally or even in terms of, the physical access meeting the digital access, about where people might be not being considered in the way that we architect some of these frameworks that you see in your communities?
Yeah, look, some of the major issues that have been going on for more than 250 years for First Nations people is that the systems don't don't understand or correlate with First Nations culture and the way that we identify ourselves in our own communities with our own people and our own languages, our own heritage. And this is a concern because you've got migrants moving into Australia and refugees. Australia's a multicultural society, so we have people of culture everywhere we live, and they are also impacted through systems that are not inclusive of diversity. And when we think of inclusion, we think of the two letters between inclusion, which is us. And inclusion means that it doesn't mean that one group has all the opportunities and all the equity. It means that all of us have a shared inclusive participation across the space. So we are an equitable society offering fair and honest opportunities for everybody. And those benefits mean that the systems need to be aligned to all facets of inclusion and not just benefiting the one, whether it's Indigenous with a particular program or scheme that other non-Indigenous people don't have, or whether it's in the westernised systems that are barriers to First Nations accessibility.
Ash, I'm going to ask you, these things always see like the individual versus scale, and the scale part is always about being able to deliver things well, when and as and how we need them, and then holding the concept of the individual, us, and as diverse and as wide-ranging as that is. How do you start thinking about getting those things right?
Well, Ping has had a long history of working with, and this is really coming at it from a technology standpoint first, and then we can move further to the right, I guess. In terms of shifting, left is about self-service, and right is about building things that can be, architected appropriately for people. So if you think about it in terms of shifting left, we want people to be able to self-service as much as they can. We've been in the identity space for over 20 years now, and we've built a lot of our technology around technology standards so things can easily integrate with as many other things as possible. So our philosophy at its core is really about connecting any user to any application and then putting the right security controls and frictionless experience between those two things. How do we include everyone? It's about being able to give everyone choice as much as possible without giving up the security posture to let them connect in their preferred manner.
Jason, how are things looking? Like, this is obviously core to what you do, and you've pointed out other examples, in terms of people migrating to Australia, cultural diversity. I've also heard people talking about mental health and inclusivity, and then there's also, of course, people living situations. And when you're starting to digitise whole range of access to services, whatever they might be, or information, are there other two questions? One, how do we make sure we think about this to bring us along? And secondly, are we getting better at it? Like you mentioned, 250 years. I mean, I remember back in the day, the Australia card, like no way. Are we starting to be better at architecting, thinking to bring everybody along?
Not really. To be honest, we've actually had the solution all along in Australia. It's been here for more than 60,000 years. And it's where we actually come from as Holdaccess. We build our technology around the ancient message stick. And the ancient message stick is a verifiable tool that was inclusive of all tribes and nations in Australia, whereby ceremonies and laws and languages were practiced. And these tribes all coexisted with unique languages, with unique locations and experiences on one continent for more than 60,000 years without wiping each other out. So it's a very powerful instrument that has been left dormant, but is still exercised in some of our remote regional locations in Australia. So we've used that and we've digitalized that so that people of culture are able to transverse the many barriers that exist around identification. But it's a holistic tool, and that's what's missing in the current day and age. The holistic approach to where many of these people of culture live and reside. We think very differently about our identity. We don't think of identity as this one as one instrument to get access. We think about identity as a transaction with our capabilities and with our all our cultural integrity associated with it. It just doesn't come with just one piece of documentation. It comes with a whole facet of information that can actually be used very well today to reduce unconscious biases and speed access and information flow between essential services. Where at the moment we have huge time constraints that block barriers to information flow. We have people in regional and remote communities who are blocked by access to digital inclusion. So there are many ways that Indigenous people have been, Indigenous people as well as underdocumented people, people of diverse backgrounds have been locked out of systems and have resulted to increased social determinants in health, employment, and multiple other areas where it becomes a social burden.
I find that fascinating, Peter. I've spoken to other Indigenous people who talk about, regulatory frameworks and things when you're adopting new knowledge systems like AI. The longest living culture, there's a lot of regulatory consideration built into culture over thousands of years, and there's a lot to be learnt from that thinking. And when, this goes, I guess, to also a piece about consultation. This is kind of a conversation for both of you. When you're talking about emerging technologies and critical technologies, of which identity is clearly one, how do you consult and make sure that everyone's, this podcast would be an example, but Ash, what are the questions you need to be asking all the time, and how does an organisation like Ping be consistently asking the questions to make sure that we're consulting properly?
Yeah, exactly why we're here, Corrie, is that, when I saw and met Jason a few weeks ago now, it was such a compelling presentation around some of the challenges that we know exist out there, but we're not hearing a lot of it, or there's not enough exposure to it. So I personally reached out to Jason on that day and said, we'd love to know more. And I think the question we, as a global technology company, need to be asking, and we often do ask, is how does it not work? We know what works. We can build for those, 80% of the cases, and we can often build for more complex situations from a technology standpoint. We've solved for a lot of that already. The thing we need to look for now is what's not working for people and individuals, and how are we providing for consent and those complex use cases where multiple things are connecting in, and how do we make sure that that's being authorised and controlled in a reasonable manner? And again, it comes back to security posture. So it's great to hear stories and examples that Jason's sharing with us today about the message stick, which is an ancient technology, but not in the sense that people think of technology today.
Jason, maybe just for the benefit of listeners, talk us through a little bit more about that, because you've talked about looking through this sort of holistic lens, which can you explain a bit more? It might kind of help reframe the way we're thinking about this in, Indigenous culture.
Yeah, so the way we, take for instance my shirt. I have a dingo on my shirt. This is my my bush name, Urranndulla. Urranndulla means red nigger dreaming. I also have a tribal name, Monjali. I have a birth name, Jason. I have another name, Budari, and I have a skin name as well, which is Buralangi. And these common these terms that we use are really special and sacred to us. These names that we use, and if you've noticed, like there are people of culture who enter into Australia and they actually change their names to a Western name in order to be easily understood by the Western systems or by Western people, because it's a common name, it's a common theme. So these are the inequities that are experienced by Indigenous people, first of all, and people of culture. They're locked out of systems because the system doesn't value us. And when the system doesn't value us, you've got billions of people around the world without identification. And those billions of people without identity are people who are then strains on those regional economies, and then cause a whole lot of backlog of information and services, that essential services that don't reach people fairly and equitably. Opportunities are missed, but then we also miss scaling regional economies, and that then creates a burden on the whole of society when diversity unlocks are not clear. So holistic models for First Nations people with the message stick represents the ability for our laws and cultures to be assigned to us with our language names, with our totems, our skins, our moieties, and that then will travel with us wherever we go. And as we interject with health services or other services, we then can be our full self in those sessions, and we're able to walk away all the better because we felt and we experienced the full inclusion of our capabilities and of our potential, which are very, very different profiles that we have in our own communities to the profiles we're seen um, in the normal westernized systems. You can have someone who's an elder of high regard who can command thousands of people, but then but that same person can be on the in a line waiting at the end for hours and hours at Centrelink and not be given the same privileges or opportunities as what he might be accelerated as in his own regional community. So these shifts in the way Indigenous people move through the system are about what we call relationship chains, and relationship chains are what embodies the way Indigenous people are able to, and underdocumented people are able to integrate into valued relationships with identity. And as we move further into digital identity, we are unlocking a category for us to reside, which is a RegTech for diversity conditions, and that will then allow the Westernized systems to understand, okay, there is a place for this to sit, and we don't understand how it would work. This is how it can work. It can be placed on what already exists, which are diversity conditions. We have RAPs, reconciliation action plans. We have global procurement requirements on social impact. We also have diversity conditions with the Indigenous procurement policy. We have the Closing the Gap strategy, which has KPIs on digital inclusion and digital informed choices, making digitally informed choices to self-determination. So we also have banking services codes and requirements that require institutions to provide services equitably to all people. And if they can't access verified identity from Indigenous people to access their accounts, then they're not providing adequate services to First Nations people, which fails them the banking codes. So there's a real issue around compliance, and our research has indicated there have been millions of dollars in fines and criminal convictions based on these breaches of the compliance requirements. So bringing us forward into this place that as a RegTech for diversity conditions gives us a more of an elevated pitch for companies to start engaging. But the thing is that you're doing this already, but we're just going to protect you more, and we're going to create better social impact outcomes for you when you do it this way.
It's very interesting. As you're talking, Jason, I'm sort of thinking from like an identity perspective. Identity is often the first way that you would engage with an institution in a way that has decided which bits of information about you are important. And when you were talking about your, multiple sort of identities around your skin name, but I'm thinking if you're talking to a bank, chances are there's been movement in gender identity, and then there might have been in married or unmarried married names. But apart from that, there's not a lot of scope. So identity as a tool to, I guess, push the conversation about the way the systems, take information. I guess that they all need to change together, I guess. Ash, I'm keeping your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and thanks again for sharing this with us, Jason. I mean, it's highly emotive hearing you speak about these things. And, I really feel you were speaking about an elder coming in and standing in the line in the Centrelink office. And not, for me, that's a respect thing. That elder deserves that respect because of their standings in their society. And I think that we miss that. And all the things you talked about there, we've got a lot of these great frameworks, and I've seen, significant progress in the last 10 years around organisations getting behind having a RAP in place and really making effort to improve on what we do. There's still a very long way to go, and I want to see more meaningful teeth and steps in those programs. For us, Corrie, to answer your question, we can integrate technologies better than most identity organisations. So we've really invested heavily in being able to provide that connective tissue in the same way that Connect ID will let individuals choose how they would like to be verified using which bank credential. We can enable organisations to allow individuals to bring a form of identification that may be a self-sovereign or a digital wallet that's not part of the organisation that we're interacting with. And this connective tissue at the technology layer is where we see we've got a role to work with organisations such as Holdaccess and the WUNA card to bring that into other technology platforms that haven't made those considerations. Because I certainly haven't seen any web form that's got enough spaces in that first field for all the names that you hold here, Jason. So we've got a long way to go with it, but if we could at least get some recognition and connectivity to who you are in your society so that you feel like a part of it. And, one of the things you said that really pricked my ears up was, I think it was Corrie, I think you said that organisations determine what information about my identity is of value. It's not really for an organisation to tell me what's valuable about my identity. I know who I am. I know my identity. And this then goes to what are the common identifiers we want to recognise. And hearing Jason speak about the multiple names that have serious value and meaning to him and his people, we've got a long way to go to bring that into web forms and things that we've had for 20 years and they've just been first name, last name and address, as an example. I think that's where my mind goes hearing about that. But I think ultimately this comes down to a respect and recognition piece.
Yes, something you said about services and that maybe think about some of the stories of where I started from and what goes on currently. And if you think about underdocumented people, First Nations people who may be unemployed, maybe in social welfare dependency cycles, one of the key indicators that drive a lot of that has been third parties controlling information on behalf of individuals. And those central databases or at times they've been held by organisations set out to provide support for Indigenous people and people who are in need or at crisis. And when we see these services holding on to this information and they no longer have recurrent funding in these programs, they can take all that information with them, leaving the individual to restart that journey over again to collect the documentation. From our pilots and research, we actually discovered that 9 in 10 people weren't using emails for correspondence, which, this is a universal tool we use now for opportunities and it's a universal correspondence system globally. So there's that, as well as when we approached organizations, we realized that it wasn't just once annually that documents were being replaced. It was happening every time they saw the person. So if you think about that, you think about the cost on the person, the cost on the organization, the amount of work that the organization has to go through to recover those documents on behalf of the individual, particularly if the individual lives in a remote or regional setting with overcrowded housing, no digital access or digital devices, where digital devices are being shared and passed around, where privacy information is held on it. The current systems don't work in that way. And your data is at risk when you've got a native app and and they're sitting on your mobile phone. Or so these forms of identification are redundant in these particular cohorts or these groups. So by understanding what the compliance requirements are and reforming the conditions on procurement, where third party services are not controlling information anymore on behalf of people, that they're handing it over to people, that they've got a way of delivering that and making it possible for people to actually utilize their information more effectively in the way that they choose, so they can make informed choices without having a third party, going to a third party and feeling that you're a second party to yourself and they are you. But effectively, it means taking control of your own information and making informed choices, which is what WUNA stands for. So what we see is that the importance of digital identity is digital self-determination, the move towards digital self-determination, and not just a move towards accessing a bank or a retail service. It actually means a holistic approach to inclusion with all essential services. And this is the space that we own, and we've been leading here, and we have a full understanding of the deep dive into that space, particularly through all those different names of cultural information, your culture and heritage, family lines. All this sort of information represents the ways that you identify. I won't keep going because I'll be here all day. So
no, I've got a lot of questions, but we're running out of time. I'm just going to ask both of you. We're coming up to the digital identification legislation expected to be presented to Parliament by 2023, end of 2023. In a snapshot, what are the things you've mentioned? A lot of different kind of lenses, Jason. Ash, I'll start with you. What are kind of 2 or 3 things that we really need to be thinking about around legislation around identity? And then Jason, the key things to focus on that will help shift the needle on the others. But Ash, I'll start with you.
Sure, thanks, Corrie. We've talked about it a lot today, the inclusion of everybody. I think you talked about it earlier, Corrie, that we've seen some advances in some areas and then other areas are still lagging behind. I think inclusion needs to be for everybody. It's just the nature of what it is and it should be. I think the speed at which our legislation is coming, never fast enough, and that's not criticising any of our government officials. It's just this needs to be yesterday. And for me personally, the fundamentals of how we treat digital identities needs to be, a secure posture. So we need to verify, we need to authenticate always, and we need to authorise. And that last piece around authorising is both for parents, children, sporting groups, families, governments, all of it. And then, of course, we've got to solve for those use cases that we haven't, as a nation, really figured out, is when there is a shared digital device across Indigenous community, it's just a different way of interacting with these systems. So we've got to solve for that as well.
Jason, where should the focus be? Like, what's going to create the best outcomes fastest?
Look, I think where we started with inclusion is critical, and inclusion means that having a diverse way of identifying. It shouldn't need to be just a one-way solution that fits all. As we know, if you're a government body and you're using a one practice and not inclusive of all other ways of identification, you can really miss a whole population of people when you do that. So one is using diverse ways of identification. That can be vendors, that can be culture and heritage. It can be all sorts of ways. But for First Nations and Indigenous people, it's a very different approach, and that needs to be given credence and validation. The second way is to better regulate compliance requirements around this particular space, so that these diversity conditions can be met with greater standards that are actually tracing and tracking these sort of efforts to be more inclusive. It's not just a document on the shelf that sits and gathers dust. It shows we're doing something for our society, but it actually becomes a meaningful, practical tool that can actually move society forward and can realise the potential of many underdocumented people and people of culture who have been consistently locked out of identity. And for us, the third way for us is to have a consistent form of Aboriginality for First Nations people. There is a certificate called Aboriginality Identification Certification, and this particular Aboriginality form has been used for a long time now, decades and decades, but it's inconsistent and it's not, it's problematic to say the least. So we are actually improving that particular space and systemising the way Aboriginality is verified and authenticated, and that particular approach should be looked at and realised that there are other ways of delivering on that particular space for compliance and all the many facets of fraud and that go on, and the potential risks associated when people disguise themselves as First Nations people. They are able to penetrate weak, outdated systems that are not systemised, but that are easily duplicated. And that's a problem for not just for First Nations people, but it's a problem for Australia.
There is a lot to think about, and there's a lot of improvement needed. I think we keep talking about it, and as such, you've been very generous with your time. Jason Urranndulla-Davis, thank you so much for sharing that insights. It's actually incredibly generous of you. Thank you. Ashley Diffey, thank you so much. It's been great to talk to both of you, and talk again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Corrie. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, guys. See you later.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Identity Matters, Digital Identity and the Evolution of the Internet video podcast series brought to you by Ping Identity. For more, keep tuning in to innovationoz.com/podcasts or visit pingidentity.com.